Radicalizing the Middle East will in the long term jeopardize Israel's security and increase the odds of this war spread. War supporters cannot see that for every Iraqi killed, another family turns on us, regardless of who did the killing. We are and will continue to be blamed for every wrong done in Iraq. All deaths, illness, water problems, food shortages, and electricity outages. As long as our political leaders persist in these denials, the war won't end. The problem is that this is the source of the anger, because the American people are not in denial and want a change in policy. Policy changes in wartime are difficult, for it is almost impossible for the administration to change course since so much emotional energy has been invested in the effort. That's why Eisenhower ended the Korean War, not Truman. That's why Nixon ended the Vietnam War, not LBJ. Even in the case of Vietnam, the end was too slow and costly, as more than 30,000 military deaths came after Nixon's election in 1968. It makes a lot more sense to avoid unnecessary wars than to overcome the politics involved in stopping them once they've started. I personally am convinced that many of our wars could be prevented by paying stricter attention to the method whereby our troops are committed to battle. I also am convinced that when Congress does not declare war, victory is unlikely. The most important thing Congress can do to prevent needless and foolish wars is for every member to take seriously his or her oath to obey the Constitution. Wars should be entered into only after great deliberation and caution. Wars that are declared by Congress should reflect the support of the people, and the goal should be a quick and successful resolution. Our undeclared wars of the past 65 years have dragged on without precise victories. We fight to spread American values, to enforce UN resolutions, and to slay supposed Hitlers. We forget that once we spread American values by persuasion and setting an example, not by bombs and preemptive invasions. Nowhere in the Constitution are we permitted to go to war on behalf of the United Nations at the sacrifice of our national sovereignty. We repeatedly use military force against former allies, thugs we helped in power, like Saddam Hussein, Osama bin Laden, and even when they pose no danger to us. The 2002 resolution allowing the President to decide when and if to invade Iraq is an embarrassment. The Constitution authorizes only Congress to declare war. Our refusal to declare war transferred power to the President illegally without a constitutional amendment. Congress did this with a simple resolution passed by a majority vote. This means Congress reneged on its responsibility as a separate branch of government and should be held accountable for the bad policy in Iraq that the majority of Americans are now upset about. Congress is every bit as much at fault as the President. Constitutional questions aside, the American people should have demanded more answers from their government before they supported the invasion and occupation of a foreign country. Some of the strongest supporters of the war declare that we are a Christian nation, yet use their religious beliefs to justify the war. They claim it is our Christian duty to remake the Middle East and attack the Muslim infidels. Evidently, I have been reading from a different Bible. I remember something about blessed are the peacemakers. My beliefs aside, Christian teaching of nearly 1,000 years reinforces the concept of the just war theory. This Christian theory emphasizes 6 criteria needed to justify Christian participation in war. Briefly, the 6 points are as follows. War should be fought only in self-defense. War should be undertaken only as a last resort. A decision to enter war should be made only by a legitimate authority. All military responses must be proportional to the threat. There must be a reasonable chance of success. And a public declaration notifying all parties concerned is required. The war in Iraq fails to meet almost all of these requirements. This discrepancy has generated anger and division in the Christian community. Some are angry because the war is being fought out of Christian duty, yet does not have uniform support from all Christians. Others are angry because they see Christianity as a release and forgiveness, not war and a nation of enemies. Constitutional and moral restraints on war should be strictly followed. It is understandable when kings, dictators, and tyrants take their people into war, since it serves their selfish interests. and those sent to fight have no say in the matter. It is more difficult to understand why democracies and democratic legislative bodies, which have a say over the issue of war, so readily submit to the executive branch of government. The determined effort of the authors of our Constitution to firmly place the power to declare war in the legislative branch has been ignored in the decades following World War II. Many members have confided in me that they are quite comfortable with this arrangement. They flatly do not expect in this modern age to formally declare war ever again. Yet no one predicts there will be fewer wars fought. It is instead assumed that they will be ordered by the executive branch or the United Nations. A rather sad commentary. What about the practical arguments against war? Since no one seems interested in exerting constitutional or moral restraints, why do we continue to fight prolonged political wars when the practical results are so bad? Our undeclared wars since 1945 have been very costly, to put it mildly. We have suffered over 100,000 military deaths and even more serious casualties. Tens of thousands have suffered from serious war-related illnesses. Sadly, we as a nation express essentially no concern for the millions of civilian casualties in the countries where we fought. The cost of war since 1945 and our military presence in over 100 countries since exceeds $2 trillion. In today's dollars. The cost of higher taxes, debt, and persistent inflation is immeasurable. Likewise, the economic opportunities lost by diverting trillions of dollars into war is impossible to measure, but it's huge. Yet our presidents persist in picking fights with countries that pose no threat to us, refusing to participate in true diplomacy to resolve differences. Congress over the decades has never resisted the political pressure to send our troops abroad on missions that defy imagination. When the people object to a new adventure, the propaganda machine goes into action to make sure critics are seen as unpatriotic Americans or even traitors. The military-industrial complex we were warned about has been transformed into a military, media, industrial, government complex that is capable of silencing the dissenters and cheerleading for the war. It's only after years of failure that people are able to overcome the propaganda for war and pressure their representatives in Congress to stop the needless killing. Many times the economic costs of war stir people to demand an end. This time around, the war might be brought to a halt by our actual inability to pay the bills due to a dollar crisis. A dollar crisis will make borrowing $2.5 billion per day from foreign powers like China and Japan virtually impossible, at least at affordable interest rates. That's when we will be forced to reassess the spending spree, both at home and abroad. The solution to this mess is not complicated, but the changes needed are nearly impossible for political reasons. Sound free market economics, sound money, and a sensible foreign policy would all result from a strict adherence to the Constitution. If the people desired it and the Congress was filled with responsible members, a smooth, although challenging transition could be achieved. Since this is unlikely, we can only hope that the rule of law and the goal of liberty can be reestablished without chaos. We must move quickly toward a more traditional American foreign policy of peace, friendship, and trade with all nations, entangling alliances with none. We must reject the notion that we can or should make the world safe for democracy. We must forget about being the world's policeman. We should disengage from the unworkable and unforgiving task of nation building. We must reject the notion that our military should be used to protect natural resources, private investments, or serve the interests of any foreign government or the United Nations. Our military should be designed for one purpose: defending our national security. It's time to come home. Financial conditions or military weakness dictates it. The major obstacle to a sensible foreign policy is fiction about what patriotism is. Today, patriotism has come to find support for the government and its policy. In earlier times, patriotism meant having the willingness and courage to challenge government policies regardless of popular opinions. Today, we constantly hear innuendos and direct insults aimed at those who dare to challenge current foreign policy, no matter how flawed that policy may be. I would suggest it takes more courage to admit the truth, to admit mistakes, than to attack others as unpatriotic for disagreeing with the war in Iraq. Remember, the original American patriots challenged the abuses of King George and wrote and carried out the Declaration of Independence. Yes, Mr. Speaker, there is a lot of anger in this country. Much of it is justified. Some of it is totally unnecessary and misdirected. The only thing that can lessen this anger is an informed public, a better understanding of economic principles,